Welcome back to the channel, you card nerds. Today, we're going to be talking about VORs. Now, I know as a private pilot, you may very well have had a little bit of experience with VORs, with like those loss procedures, maybe a little bit of cross-country procedures, but we're now going to start talking about VORs in the context of an instrument pilot. So let's get into it. First things first, what's a VOR? Well, VOR, it technically stands for Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range. You might be looking at your TV or your phone or your computer screen right now going, geez, pilot, that's a lot of fancy words. I don't come to your channel for fancy words. I come to your channel because you break it down Barney style. So we're going to break it down Barney style. Let's talk about that first one, the V, Very High Frequency. That just tells you what band that it's operating in. It's operating between 108 megahertz and 117.95 megahertz. So if what you're trying to tune in to your navigation radio is outside of that range, not a VOR. Probably a localizer, an ADF, I don't know what it is, but it's not a VOR. So that next one, omnidirectional. Omnidirectional just means that you're going to receive a signal from it in all 360 degrees. It's not a directional beacon. It doesn't point straight up. It doesn't point straight out from the runway. It doesn't point in a specific direction. It's giving you signal all the way around it as long as you're within line of sight of it. There's no buildings, no mountains or anything blocking your line of sight from that VOR station. And the last one is just range, right? To be honest, I don't know what the range stands for. Because not all VORs are created equal. Some VORs have DME or distance measuring equipment, and we'll try to make another video about what DME is, how to use it. I'll try to put a little thing up here somewhere for it. But VOR, it's super simple. Very high frequency radio on the ground that's giving you signals in 360 degrees so that you can pinpoint your direction from that VOR and tune in, of course, to take you to it. Now, there's a couple different types of VORs. We've got a terminal, a low, and a high VOR. So terminal, these ones are usually, they're going to give you a range of about 25 miles. I think they might be bumping that up to 40 with the minimum operational network. And they usually take you up to about 12,000 feet. So as long as you're within that service volume, you should have a reliable signal from that terminal VOR. You can think of these ones as ones that you're going to use approaches for, ones that are going to get you in and out of the airport. Then you've got your low VORs. These ones are going to give you 40 miles. I think with minimum operational network, they're taking that up to 70 miles, and they're going to give you up to 18,000 feet. You can think of these as the ones that are going to take you from the airport area to your en route structure, which takes us to our high altitude VORs. These can cover up to 130 nautical miles. They've got a bunch of different shelves. I'll try to show a little graphic for them right there so that you can kind of break it down. But you can think of these ones as your cross-country VORs. If you're trying to get from California to New York, this is what you're going to use as long as you don't have some kind of GPS system or some other system that could give you navigation. This is how I got my airplane home. I used VORs because I didn't have any GPS that I could use for IFR. So it's not unreasonable to think, oh, I don't need to know about VORs. They're ancient technology, which swings us right into minimum operational network, or MON. I know you've heard me say that word or those words a couple times so far. What is minimum operational network? Well, minimum operational network is kind of what it sounds like. It's the minimum amount of VORs that are going to stay active as we transition to satellite-based navigation. It's the minimum number of VORs, meaning that at any point in the contiguous United States, the 48 United States, you should be able to pick up a VOR and navigate to a minimum operational network within 100 miles. Saying that, let's say GPS goes down for one reason or another, you still have a way to get yourself out of the clouds and back onto pavement safely. All right, now here we are back in our favorite airplane, the Cessna 172 with the six-pack. So before we start navigating with VORs, we need to start talking about the things that are actually presented to us in the flight deck or in the cockpit. and how we read them, how we interpret what signals the VOR is sending us. And the way that we do that is with our CDI. The CDI has an OBS knob. It also has the compass rose all around it, and that's where you tune in your course. That's not where you select a radial. That's where you tune in your course. And we've got a couple different flags on it. We've got our to from flag. We have our navigation flags. And then we also have what data is being presented on this instrument currently. Now, your airplane may have different instrumentation, so I do want to recommend you go and read the supplements associated with your navigation equipment so that you understand how your airplane works. But we're going to cover this one in Microsoft Flight Sim right now. Now, my navigation radios are right here on my Garmin. I think this is a 430. Oh, sorry, Garmin 530. And I've got my VOR frequencies right here. The closest VOR to me is 113.3, and it's this Williams Gateway VOR right there, just a little bit up to the left from my airplane. All right, and I can even see it with the little north up down there as well. But you see how it says VLOC right here, but it says GPS right here? That means this CDI is currently taking in GPS data. I don't want GPS data, I want VOR data. So I can press this little CDI button, change it to VLOC down there. I got VLOC down up here. Now I can see that my navigation flag, my lateral flag, went away, letting me know that this CDI is now presenting me real information. When I had when I had GPS in, it's showing me this navigation flag, pretty much telling me, you have no data. This is not centered up. There is no data being presented here. Now that I switch over to VLOC, so I'm actually using the VOR, so I'm actually using the navigation radio, the lateral portion went away. The lateral flag went away, saying, look, this CDI right here, this little needle, it's actually giving you information. You can use it. If I was to lose signal from a VOR, the VOR goes dead. I lose line of sight of it. I would see that flag pop up, and I can change it over to the Stanfield VOR, and look, I got that flag back up, letting me know, hey, you're not receiving signal. The Stanfield VOR isn't that far from the Williams Gateway Airport. There's just mountains in the way, so I don't have that line of sight. Let's switch back to the Williams Gateway VOR and talk about this to from flag. This to from flag confuses a lot of people. What this to from flag tells me is, will the course that I have selected take me to the VOR or from the VOR? So if I tune in this course right here, it looks like about 282. I know that I would track away from the VOR if I flew a heading of roughly 280, 285, 290, depending on the wind. If I flew a heading and tracked a course, if I flew a heading of 285 and tracked a course of 282, I would go away from the VOR. And you can see that by looking over there on the map. If I was to fly that way, it would obviously take me away from that Williams Gateway Airport. Now, if I tune in a 2, we could see that the 2 is the exact opposite of the from. So if I center that up, you can see that old from course that I had down there, but up at the top is the course that I have actually selected, which is, 098, 102, 106, 108, something like that. And that would take me to the VOR, and you could see that with that little compass rose right there. Now, if I didn't have this, GPS, this might be a little bit more difficult to discern. So go out, get some practice, whether it be in Microsoft Flight Sim, whether it be in your actual aircraft, and try to figure out where you are or what course would take you to and what course would take you from and how you're going to get there. Now, let's take this airplane up in the air and actually do a little bit of navigation with our VOR, our CDI, and our OBS. All right, here we are getting on up to our cruise altitude. We're climbing on up to 5,000 feet. We do have an autopilot on this airplane just to make it a little easier to actually operate and record the videos. So we're up here. We're going to be using the Stanfield VOR, and we're going to be track an inbound and outbound on some radials. We might do some DME arcs, and at the end of it, we'll probably just do a VOR approach so that you can see all of the things you can do in instrument conditions with a VOR. VORs are absolutely wonderful. I love them. Of course, GPS is easier to use, but VORs, I feel as if, you know, it's a bit more affordable to ensure that you have VORs in your own airplane if you intend on eventually buying your own airplane, as opposed to trying to afford, you know, the fanciest GPS. I mean, even this Garmin 530 that's in this, that a lot of you student pilots might be thinking is somewhat of a budget option, is still $5,000 or $6,000. So VORs definitely help keep that price point down. So let's talk about what the call might sound like if ATC was to say, hey, track outbound, track inbound, do X, Y, and Z from a VOR, right? So ATC might say, Cessna 1 Hotel Tango, turn right heading 330, track the 360 radial outbound from the Stanfield VOR. So how are we going to do that? First off, we need to tune in this. Well, I guess first off, we should probably turn to that heading because that was the instruction ATC gave us. And while the airplane's turning to that heading, we can start getting the rest of the stuff done that we need to get done, like tune, test, and identify the VOR to make sure that, well, that VOR actually works. So there we are on our heading. Now, I'm going to tune the 114.8 on the VLOC, or on the radio, right? And we can see that right there. Now, how do I identify it? I identify it by pressing on the volume ID. And again, this is going to be different for your airplane. But if you press the volume ID and you ensure that on your audio panel you have nav selected, you're going to start hearing the Morse code. And you probably heard it a couple times already. Now, do I have a chart in front of me? No. Is this correct? Probably. But you do always want to make sure you check your en route chart or your approach plate or whatever you happen to be using to navigate to verify that this is correct. Now, we need to decide, are we going to be going to or from the VOR? So ATC told us to track outbound on the 360 radial. So we need to make sure that we have a from flag. I see right up here on my OBS that, or correction, on my CDI, that I do have a from flag, and right up on the top I can see I've got a 360 course tuned in. Now, if I am tracking outbound or away from a VOR, I know that the course is going to match the radial. If I'm tracking inbound, it's going to be the reciprocal. So we're tracking this heading. Let's put a couple more scoochums in so that maybe we can get up to about 100 knots, and let's go intercept that radial. Now, as we get closer and closer to the VOR that we plan on tracking inbound, or the radial that we plan on tracking outbound, you can see that the needle is now starting to move. Now, we're pretty far from the Stanfield VOR, so this needle isn't going to be very sensitive, so I don't need to lead the turn by a whole lot. But if I'm really close to the VOR needle is going to be super sensitive, so I'm going to need to lead the turn pretty much as soon as the needle comes alive. So, I'm saying maybe when I get about 2 dots off, right? So you see those dots? We're currently 3 dots off. When I get about 2 dots off, I might start a gradual turn to end up on that course. Now, if there's any wind, I'm going to have to do what's known as bracketing. Now, what bracketing is I am going to pick a heading. I'm going to pretty much match my heading and my course. I'm going to match my heading, my course, and my radial since I am going outbound. And I am going to see if that keeps me on course. If it does, then it's good. There's no wind, or it's a headwind or a tailwind. Now, if it doesn't keep me on course, I am going to probably turn left or right, whichever direction I end up off course. You know, whichever direction I'm going to turn, I'm going to end up off course. I'm going to turn the opposite direction. I'm going to go get the needle. And once I get on that needle, I'm going to cut the difference, right? I'm going to cut it in half. So if it took me 15-degree turn to the left to go and get the needle, I'm going to come back to 7 degrees left of my original heading, right? So if my original heading was 360, I'm going to turn left 7 degrees and see if that holds my course. If it doesn't, then I need to turn left another half. So about 10, 11 degrees. Now, when that goes and gets the course, I'm then going to go about half back. So I'm taking it down to about 9 or so. And that's really how I bracket in my crosswind correction until I end up having a heading that will track my course that ATC has told me to track. Currently, I'm about half a dot off, which would mean that I am about 1 degree off. So if I was to center up the needle, I should be on the 359 radial right now. But it seems like I'm not actually on that just yet. We'll give it a little bit more correction. Seems like I might be paralleling it. Maybe give it just a little bit more of a correction. But as you can see, this is how you track a radial. It's pretty simple, especially when you've got an autopilot. When you don't have an autopilot, you know, you're obviously scanning the rest of your instruments, making sure that you're maintaining altitude, airspeed, etc. Autopilots do make it a whole lot easier, but just be careful with autopilots. Make sure you know how to use it. Make sure you know what it's doing before you ever engage it, because autopilots are more than happy to stall you. Autopilots are more than happy to kill you. Okay, so let's say ATC said, Cessna 1 Hotel Tango, turn left 240 and track the 340 radial inbound to the Stanfield VOR. So I'm going to turn to the heading ATC told me to go to, which I believe was 240. And once I get on that heading, I'm going to tune in that 340 radial. But since I am tracking inbound, I want to make sure that I put in the reciprocal. So since I was tracking outbound this last time, I want to put the reciprocal of that new radial in because I need a 2 flag. If I don't get that 2 flag, if I don't get the appropriate flag, whether it be to or from, the VOR is going to do what's known as reverse sensing, meaning the needle is going to show you where the airplane is in relation to the course as opposed to where the course is in relation to the airplane. So if the needle was off to the left, that means you would have to turn right to get on course. And you can see how that might end up a little confusing. So we can see we've got that 340 radial tuned in. I see it down there on the bottom. And it turns into, what would that be? A 160 course. And we're just going to track this inbound. So now, as I see that needle starting to swing in, oh, twisted the wrong one. Now that I see that needle starting to swing in, I'm going to start turning on course. And it's the same idea. Tune in the appropriate heading that matches my course, and then I'm going to bracket in to make sure that I don't need to make any wind corrections. So we're just a smidge off course right now. So maybe I'll give it just a little bit more to the right. Get that needle 100% centered up. I don't want to be half here, half there. I want to get that needle 100% centered up. Now, the next thing that we're going to do now that we got this needle all 100% tuned up or centered up is we are going to track it to the VOR, and we are going to cross over top of the VOR just to show you some of the issues with VORs. We talked about the fact that you need line of sight, right? There can't be any physical obstructions between you and the VOR, or else you just won't get signal from it. Now let's go and fly directly over top of the VOR and then track outbound so that we can see some of the other concerns with VORs. Now, as we get closer and closer to the VOR, what you're probably going to notice is that the VOR is going to become more and more sensitive. A radial coming out of a VOR is a cone shape, right? So GPS gives you a kind of a block to operate in, right? A VOR gives you a cone to operate in. So as you can see, just that little turn off my intended heading, I'm already getting off course. Now, when we were 30 miles away from the VOR just a little bit ago, it would have taken a lot more time for that to end up happening. So as you get closer and closer to the VOR, you need to make smaller and smaller corrections for those little deviations. This is why it's important to make sure that if you're going to track a radial to a VOR, you get that thing centered up, you get your crosswind correction, you get your bracketing done way out so that you can make very small 2-3 degree changes to make sure that you stay on course. Now, let's get even closer to the VOR. Now, as we're getting closer and closer and closer to the VOR, what you're probably noticing is, again, that needle is getting more and more sensitive. And what we're eventually going to get into is known as the zone of confusion. Okay, so when we are right on top of the VOR, sorry, I misspoke. It's the cone of confusion. When we are right on top of the VOR in this kind of cone shape, so the higher you are, the wider that cone is, you end up receiving pretty much all of the radial signals at one time, and the needle pretty much becomes unreliable to follow. Like it just doesn't give you accurate information. So when you are crossing over the top of the VOR, you are pretty much just going to try and make sure you're bracketed in as good as you can be. And then you're just going to blow through that cone of confusion on that heading. Now, if you've got, let's say a change, which is very common. It's very common to have a change in course. You're going to hit the top of the VOR at that to from flip. You're going to turn to your new heading that would match up with your new course. And then once you get past that zone cone of confusion, then you're going to continue to track that new radial. So let's practice that. Let's say that we are going to track outbound on the 150 150 radial. Okay, so I am just going to track my current heading because I'm currently in that cone of confusion. And once I see that to from flip, I am then going to track outbound on that 150 radial. So we're currently about 1 mile from the VOR. And you can see that just right over here, 1 mile, 0.9 miles. And we're going to use that in our next demonstration, which is known as a DME arc, or distance measuring equipment arc. We're going to do a circle around the VOR. So here we are, cone of confusion. This CDI just centered up the needles, pretty much saying, hey, not reliable. Now that we got that to from flip, let's turn to our new heading that would get us on course. Now we're still kind of in that cone of confusion right now, so I'm not really paying too much attention to that needle. But I'm gonna be cautious of the information being provided to me by that needle. Is really the best way to describe how to handle the cone of confusion. Well, we didn't hurt ourselves in confusion in the cone of confusion, so I'd call that a success. Now what we're going to do is we are going to track outbound on this VOR, or on this radial. We're going to track outbound on this radial until we get to 15 DME or 15 miles from the VOR. And then we are going to arc south. The instruction would probably be closer to arcing west. So what we're going to do is we're going to track outbound on this VOR radial until we get about a half mile from 15. And then we're going to pretty much make a 90-degree right turn because they told me to arc to the west. So I'm just going to turn to the west. I'm going to make a 90-degree right turn. And then I'm going to turn my course 10 degrees. So I'm going to then go get the 160 radial. Once I'm at the 160 radial, I'm going to go get the 170 radial. And I'm going to do all of that while trying to make sure that I am not drifting away from the VOR. So I might need to turn more than 90. If there's a wind blowing me into the VOR, I might need to turn less than 90. But again, we're just going to bracket it in. There's no course that we're really going to be flying. We're going to be flying a distance. So if I see my distance getting bigger, I need to turn to the VOR. If I see my distance getting smaller, I need to turn away from the VOR. So change of plans, we're going to do 10 miles because 15, it's just going to take us a little bit more to get there. So here I'm coming up on my 0.5 from that mileage, from that mark, right? So there's 9.5. So now I'm going to make a right 90-degree turn off of my current heading. Right about there. Then I'm going to push my CDI out 10 degrees. Now I'm going to go get that next VOR, or that next radial, but I can see my distance has already gotten too high, right? I'm at 10.2 DME. So I'm going to turn a little bit into the VOR to try and correct that. Oh, look, I'm already at 10.1. Here comes my next course. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I'm going to go get that next one. And again, just adjusting my heading until I get to that next radial. I'm at 10.1 right now. So maybe just a little bit more turn inbound. There we go. And then needle's alive. Once that needle comes close, I'm then going to push it out another 10. Now there are other instruments you can use when it comes to doing DME arcs. There's a thing known as an RMI needle. What an RMI needle is it points directly at the VOR. So it makes it a little bit easier because you're not twisting the course every 10 degrees, but it's, I don't know. Some airplanes have them, some airplanes don't. Most of the time, it's got a horizontal situation indicator as opposed to a CDI and a heading indicator. This airplane does not have a horizontal situation indicator. It only has a heading indicator and a CDI. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That might have been too much heading change, but I did see my distance went up 0.1. So we're just trying to stay at that 10 DME. We're trying to stay at that 10-mile distance from the Stanfield VOR. And that's all a DME arc is. They're super simple. Some people get a little concerned about them. The clearances can be a little confusing. As you already heard me, even I was a little confused. Like, am I arcing south? Am I arcing west? Just remember, arc in the direction from the VOR. They want you to arc, if they want you to arc south, they want you to arc south of the VOR. If they want you to arc west, they want you to arc west of the VOR. Does that make sense? It's not your west, it's the VOR's west. Now, the last thing that we're going to do is an approach into Casa Grande off of the Stanfield VOR. So how do we do an approach off of a VOR? Carefully. No, I'm joking. The way that we're going to do an approach off of a VOR is we are going to pull up an approach plate and talk about it. So let's just pause the airplane at its current position so that we can pull up that VOR plate and talk about it. All right, now here we are. I'll try to make this just a little bit bigger to make it a little easier for y'all to see. I guess that's not going to work. Maybe I can get it just a little bit bigger. There we go. So we're going to do an approach off of the Stanfield VOR into Casa Grande. So this approach, it's a little different than some of the other approaches you might do. Most approaches, when it comes to a VOR, you're flying to the VOR, so it's getting more and more sensitive the closer and closer you get to your missed approach point. But this one, you're actually flying from the VOR. So let's take a look at this approach plate. Now, a lot of people, when they start briefing an approach, they want to come up here and they just want to go, we're going to be doing the Casa Grande approach, the VOR runway 5, the AWOS is 132.175, Albuquerque Center is 125.4, 122.1 for Prescott Radio, or 114.8. The CTAF at Casa Grande looks like it's 122.7. The VOR is 114.8. Our final approach course is 048. You see how boring that is? You see how you probably stopped paying attention? I bet half of you clicked away from the video already. What we're going to do when we're briefing an approach, whether it be a VOR, whether it be a GPS, whether it be an ILS, is tell me a story. Okay, so hey, we're currently arcing around the Stanfield VOR. Looks like ATC is probably going to send us direct to the Stanfield VOR. If they send us from this quadrant over here with close to like a 048 course inbound, we're going to expect a direct entry, and we'll probably cross the VOR and drop down to our minimums. Now, if they send us from the other quadrant, we're most likely going to do a procedure turn. If they don't clear us past the VOR, then obviously we're going to go direct to the VOR and hold as published. I've already got the frequency tuned in. We've got a final approach course of 048. I'll probably tune in the VOR on both of these CDIs so that I could have it available to me, my final approach course and my inbound to the VOR course. We've got minimums of 1920 once we, or correction, 1960 once we cross. Looks like it'll take me about 5 minutes. We're dropping down from 3,500, so that's a pretty shallow descent. Our VDP is 6.4 from the VOR, not from the airport, so just keep that in mind. And if we don't break out, we're going to go missed. It looks like it's climbed to 2,200, then climbing right turn, 3,500 direct to the Stanfield VOR, and hold. We've got a minimum safe altitude of 5,800, so if we ever lose situational awareness, we're just going to hop on up to 5,800. Comments, questions, concerns, additions, right? So we told a story about what we were going to do. We didn't just read the plate, you know, mind-numbingly, just like, okay, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna, all right. So I'll try to have the approach plate up so that you guys can follow along on the plate, but I am just going to do the approach without it, right? So what I like to do is I am going to tune in 114.8 down here so I can have both CDIs presenting me information. Make sure we press our CDI key so that we can get our VLOC flag. And I am going to use this one to actually set my final approach course so that once I cross the Stanfield VOR, I can just swap right on over. 1, 2. I don't have to press any buttons. I don't have to twist any CDIs. I can just go, okay, I'm there. Track inbound on this one now. All right. So let's unpause it. Let's track direct to the Stanfield VOR, and then we'll go to Casa Grande. So, Cessna, 1 Hotel Tango, descend maintain 3,500. Roger, descend maintain 3,500. So I'm going to set my altitude, 3,500. Set my vertical speed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And reduce power. Oops, I changed my altitude. I didn't want my altitude. I wanted my BSI. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 1,000 feet per minute. Yeah, it's a little steep. Let's track inbound to the VOR. Looks like it's going to be a course of about 360 maybe. But what I do need to do is get a 2 flag. Which means I'm probably going to be tracking the 180 or roughly the 180 radial inbound. So there's my 2 flag. And the needle should be coming alive. There's the needle alive. Looks like I'm going to need to make a little bit more of a right turn to track this in. Now we're passing through passing through 3,000. Let's reduce our vertical speed so that we're not just bombing on down. And once I get to the VOR, I'm most likely going to introduce a notch of flaps so that I can be a little bit more ready to land in the event that I break out. Now, here's the thing. I didn't set the weather. I just put the weather close to the ground. So we might break out. We might not break out. Remember, it's a sim. Don't judge my landings. Unless it's good, right? If my landing's good, then I want applause in the comment. No, I'm just messing with you. So we're going to use all those tools that we just learned about bracketing inbound so that we can get on course and track to the Casa Grande airport. Now here we are leveling out. Let's bring our power back up. Now I can slow down to, if I don't really want to just bomb straight to the VOR because I want to make sure that I can slow down in time. I want to make sure that I'm slowed down and configured by the time I get there. Because this one, it's not a very long approach from our Stanfield VOR. It's not a very long approach. Let's see if it'll bring me the approach plate again. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It did not bring me the approach plate. Shenanigans. Approach. I don't want the ILS. I want the VOR. VOR. There we go. Hide that. Get a little bit more. So it looks like we're coming at it from the southwest. We're at 3,500. Looks like it's from my VOR, from my final approach fix to my missed approach point. Looks like it is 7.8 miles. 7.8 miles from the Stanfield VOR to my missed approach point. But it's 6.4 to my VDP. So if I'm not visual by 6.4, I'm expecting to go missed. Now I'm about 4 miles from the VOR, so I want to be careful with my corrections. I don't want to overcorrect. Three and a half from the VOR. .6 from the VOR. I guess we could come at it just a little bit faster. Doing 85 right now. I guess we could do 90 at the very least. Now, I'd say I'm probably getting into that cone of confusion right now, so we're pretty much right there. Turning to my final approach course probably wouldn't be a bad idea. So there comes my final approach course needle. Reduce power. Drop another notch of flaps. Drop my first notch of flaps. My final approach course needle's coming alive. Seeing little wiggles here and there. We're right on top of the VOR, half mile away from it. We are definitely in that zone of confusion, cone of confusion. You see how confusing it is? Like, where am I? Which way did he go, George? Which way did he go? There's my from. Now, let me set 2,000 on my altitude so that I can go down to my minimums. Then vertical speed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And back to my heading. Ooh, almost oversped my flaps. This might have been easier to do just hand flown instead of trying to use the autopilot. It might have been easier to just hand fly this. But we're coupled to the autopilot and we are doing just fine. Probably do just another little reduction in power. Probably flatten out our descent rate. Making sure I'm bracketed in. I'm just a little left, of course. And I'm not looking at that GPS. I'm not using it for anything. I am just looking at my CDIs. Airspeed's good. You see why it's so important to know how to use your autopilot, though? This autopilot right now could very easily kill me if I didn't know what I was doing with it, if I didn't have the experience, if I didn't have the training, if I didn't read the manual. Setting a vertical speed and reducing power, I could end up stalling this airplane on approach really close to the pavement, really close to the ground, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to disengage the autopilot. Autopilot's off, but the airplane's trimmed, so I shouldn't really need to make much adjustments. Minimums. And I see flashy lights. I think those are the rabbits. Those are the rabbits. So we are continuing on. I can go ahead and drop another notch of flaps. Once I know landing is assured, I'll drop my last notch of flaps. Pavement in sight, landing. So as you can see, VOR approaches, they're a lot of times they're kind of weird because they're really just designed to get you below the clouds. Like an ILS, I believe we did a video on ILS. I'll try to have it linked up here somewhere. With an ILS, they're taking you to the pavement. A VOR approach, on the other hand, it's just getting you below the clouds and near the airport. So I'm fairly certain that landing is going to happen. I'm on path, so we'll go ahead and drop our last notch of flaps. Maintain roughly a 70 knot approach speed. I'm high on those pappies, so small reductions in power. Maybe bigger reductions in power. Let me just look up just a little more. There we go. That's better. That's better. Now, I was an instrument instructor in Arizona, and the Stanfield VOR has this thing known as the stack. All right. The Stanfield VOR has a GPS, an ILS, and a VOR approach all off of it. So it's a really good place to do instrument training. The only problem is there's like 5 flight schools in the Arizona, in this area. So what they've all kind of agreed to is that they will all stack 500 feet on top of each other over the Stanfield VOR in that hold, waiting their turn to shoot an approach. And that wasn't a half bad landing. So, as you can see, VORs, just because they're old technology doesn't mean they're not versatile, doesn't mean they're not useful. It doesn't mean that they can't be your primary navigation source. So if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. I love helping y'all out, teaching y'all. But last little disclaimer, I am an instructor. I am not your instructor. This video is not a replacement for flight instruction. If you want to go fly in the clouds using VORs, please go get appropriate instrument training. But as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon so you get notified every time we come out with more educational content. And as always, keep it cheesy.